Who is this actually good for, who should skip it, and is it worth the price for normal everyday buyers? If you've been scrolling through endless RAM options and wondering whether a 64GB DDR5 kit with flashy lighting really makes a difference in your day-to-day workflow, you're not alone. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The biggest hesitation I hear from people is that they don't need the fastest memory, but they also don't want to end up with a module that bottlenecks a new CPU or forces an upgrade later. Let's talk about the practical side of installing the CORSAIR Vengeance RGB DDR5 64GB kit in a typical high-end desktop. I've been looking at builds where the primary goal is either heavy content creation, think 4K video editing, large Photoshop files, or 3D rendering, or gaming rigs that want to future-proof for upcoming titles that start to lean on more memory bandwidth. In those scenarios, having two 32GB sticks at 6000 MHz does more than just hit a headline number. It actually lets the system keep more data resident in RAM, reducing the need to swap to the SSD during long export sessions. That translates to smoother timelines in Premiere or quicker viewport refreshes in Blender, especially when you're multitasking with several heavy apps open. On the flip side, if your daily routine is browsing, office work, or occasional gaming at 1080p, you're likely never going to tap the extra capacity or speed. A 16GB or 32GB kit running at a more modest 4800 MHz would handle those tasks just fine, and you'd save a fair chunk of cash. That's the first group who should skip this kit: users who don't already have a CPU that can take advantage of DDR56000 and who aren't planning to push memory-intensive workloads. Now, why does this particular CORSAIR kit stand out beyond the raw numbers? The first thing I noticed is the 10-zone RGB lighting. It's not just a static glow. Each stick has individually addressable zones that can sync with other CORSAIR gear through iCUE. If you're building a rig that you'll showcase on stream or at a LAN party, the lighting adds personality without requiring extra hardware. The real practical strength is that the lighting is optional. Turn it off in BIOS and it's just a sleek black module, which is great for people who prefer a minimalist look. The onboard voltage regulation is another feature that matters when you actually push the memory. DDR5 modules have a built-in voltage regulator to handle the higher frequencies, and CORSAIR's design keeps the power draw stable even under sustained loads. In real-world terms, that means fewer crashes when you're rendering a 30-minute 4K video and the system is under constant stress. I've seen cheaper kits with similar speeds stumble or require manual tweaking of timings to stay stable. The Vengeance RGB tends to run at its advertised CL38 out of the box with the XMP profile. Speaking of XMP, the custom Intel XMP 3.0 profiles are preloaded to hit the 6000 MHz rating. You just enable XMP in the BIOS and the kit configures itself, sparing you the trialandra of manual timing adjustments. That's a practical advantage for anyone who isn't comfortable diving into memory timings or who wants a quick, reliable setup. The downside: the XMP profile is tuned for Intel platforms, so AMD users might not see the exact same frequency and may need to tweak a bit. It's not a deal breaker, but it's a hidden trade-off you should know before buying. Let's walk through a concrete use case. Imagine you've just built a workstation with an Intel Core i9-13900K, a high-end GPU, and a fast NVMe SSD. You install this 64GB kit, enable XMP, and launch a 3-minute 8K video export in DaVinci Resolve. With the 6000 MHz bandwidth, the CPU can pull raw frames from RAM faster, and the GPU can start encoding while the next frames are already queued. The export finishes a few minutes earlier than it would with a 32GB 5600 MHz kit. That time-saving compounds over multiple projects, making the higher price feel justified for professionals. Contrast that with a typical gaming session. You load an open-world title, hit the highest settings, and the game pulls most of its data from the GPU VRAM and SSD rather than system RAM. The difference between 32GB and 64GB is barely noticeable, and the extra megahertz rarely translates to a measurable FPS bump. If your primary goal is gaming, you might allocate that budget toward a better GPU or a higher refresh rate monitor instead. Another practical point is compatibility. DDR5 is still relatively new, and not every motherboard supports the highest speeds. Most Z690 and Z790 boards will list a maximum supported frequency, and some will only reach 5600 MHz without manual overclocking. If you pair this kit with a board that caps at 5600 MHz, you won't get the full 6000 MHz benefit, though you'll still enjoy the 64 GB capacity. Checking your motherboard's QVL, qualified vendor list, before purchase is essential, otherwise you risk paying for performance you can't unlock. What about the physical installation? The 32GB sticks are a bit longer than older.